today. Pray that you will guide us as we talk about some fairly sobering and important topics today. Pray that you will use this to edify us and to steel our hearts as we live in this time. Bless us today in Jesus' name, amen. Well, today, now I usually would put a nice, cute little graphic that would go along with what I'm talking about. This is kind of a take on multitasking, but this is multi-axing. And if I put an axe up there, YouTube would flag the video because it's violent. I'm not kidding you. I mean, it's... So look, here's some of the channels we're on. We talk each week about the convergence of events, and things seem to be accelerating very, very rapidly towards some sort of conclusion. And then there is a conclusion coming to all of this. And so this is just a little bit, this is sort of the framework, not sort of, it is one of the framework that I sort of look at things through. I know that there are all these different Bible passages that talk about things in the Middle East, and I don't go through the passages each week. I assume that most of you have sort of a working knowledge of the prophetic scriptures, but the important things about the rise of Babylon, the beast kingdom, the mark of the beast, what Jesus said about wars, rumors of wars, the abomination of desolation. And so I know that things related to those things are going to happen. They're going to happen quickly. They're going to be happening all at the same time. And then there's a logistical aspect to some of these things. And if I talk about drones and I don't say something about logistics today, somebody please remind me. I think I can remember to do it. But there's a point that I want to make in that regard because I think it relates to the first two, acceleration and convergence. And then, of course, the understanding that as we get closer to the end, we're going to have this ability to see things a little bit more clearly. I actually had an eye appointment this week. Had a great discussion with my optometrist about these things. And he was very gracious to just sit there and discuss it with me. And it was true. I mean, he did all these little things and, boy, just a couple clicks and putting in the right lens, I could see everything, I think, even better than I had hoped for. But that was because I had the right instruments. And we know that in this, as we get closer to the end, I think we're going to see a couple things in the church. I think we're going to have better understanding. There's a lot of debate now about how does this happen, and some people think they have it all worked out. And I take a little bit more, try to take a more or less dogmatic approach, because I think that we're still at a time where some of these things are starting to crystallize maybe in ways that we hadn't really thought about, and they're coming about more quickly. And so let me make the comment about the drone technology. This is an example of what I want to talk about. Look, in modern warfare, it's changing. It's changing rapidly. For example, and I have a little bit about this, Russia and China have developed these hypersonic weapons that the United States does not have yet. We just do not, at least there's no public announcement or there's been no evidence that the United States has tested these. And so Russia and China have these weapons, and back in July, China did a test of its hypersonic weapon, and the U.S. response to that has been pretty troubling because everybody from the defense secretary on down, when they're not out there pushing, making sure all our troops become woke to the point of insomnia on all of these cultural issues, they're mentioning that they're troubled by what they saw China do with its hypersonic weapon test. Now, it missed its target by 24 miles, but maybe that was on purpose to kind of throw people off and make them step back. You understand that? So this is a very difficult time. And the same way with drone technology. drones have become a major part of warfare. We'll talk about that a little bit later today. And so when you look at these things from the standpoint of logistics, acceleration, convergence, drones would be an example of that, because there's some passages like Ezekiel 38 and 39, which we talk about a lot, which everybody talks about a lot. It mentions there that this alliance that comes against Israel in the end times is a great company and a mighty army. And the question is, well, how does that all work out exactly? Is it 2 million people in the army? Is it 100,000? Is it a great company, a mighty army from the perspective of Ezekiel writing 2,500 years ago? Or is it sort of a combination of things? And what you're seeing, and I'll look at this a little bit, particularly in the conflict between Iran and Israel, and Iran and everybody else, the rapid development of relatively inexpensive drone technology has created an asymmetrical warfare, and it's leveling the playing field. So Iran now, because of its adoption of drone technology, Turkey also is big on using drones. By the way, Seth Fransman wrote a good book on that about drone wars, I think it's called. You should take a look at it if you want to get a little bit more information, because this is changing the face of warfare. And so what it does is it makes Iran, maybe it doesn't have a huge army. It doesn't have the budget, but with drones, relatively inexpensive drones, it can level the playing field. And I think that plays into this prophetic scenario. And the other thing that it means is that some of these things that we read in Scripture might actually come about more quickly than we think. There's a lot of talk, and I'll talk about it today, of war between Iran and Israel. Now, is that Ezekiel 38 and 39? Is it a precursor to that? Is it part of the wars and rumors of wars? But it does show that these things can kind of come together a little bit more quickly. Let me share one other passage of Scripture where I think all of this is going. This is Psalm 2. I was reading it this week. Why do the heathen rage, and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sits in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath, and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet I have set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord has said unto me, thou art my son. This day I have begotten thee. Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Pam and I were recently at Liberty University, and Dr. Randall Price was gracious enough to give us a tour of the biblical artifacts there at the university library. Tremendous collection. It's just phenomenal. But here is one thing you see, especially when you're looking at the collection of archaeologists, there's a lot of broken pottery. And this verse kind of comes to life when you see those examples. Verse 10, be wise now, therefore, O ye kings, be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and ye perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him. So this sort of gives a overview of where all of this is heading. The Lord is going to take care of this. The Lord is going to come back, and he's going to deal with all of these things, as it said in verse 5. Then he shall speak to them in his wrath and vex them in his sore displeasure. So the Lord's going to take care of this. The other thing that I think, and I've said this for years, off and on, is that what I think is going on is that the Lord is bringing these things about. And if we are paying attention and we understand where it ends up and what the ultimate destination of the believer is, those who are believers in the Lord, according to the scriptures, is that these events that we see going on are decoupling us from our desire to be heavily invested in the world. I see this with a lot of comments of people on Facebook. Now, I think we're supposed to be engaged while we're here, but we also know that our orientation is not rooted in the way things are in the earth, that eventually we know the Lord is going to come back, as he says here in Psalm 2, and take care of this. But you got to be very careful in how rooted you are in the things of the world. I think there's things we're supposed to be salt and light and all of those things. I don't, by any stretch of the imagination, say that we should give up. We should also remember that we have a different orientation with the way things are going. So let's look at some of the things that are going on. This again is the Economist cover, The World Ahead 2022, and they predict things. I mean, some of them have been, this is the tip sheet of the Party of Davos. It's sometimes described, or one of their publications. And in this one, what you see is a lot of needles, which means that there's boosters that are coming. It's a lot interesting I'll tell you, sometimes I read some of these discussions on Twitter, and it's not very nice. For example, Marcus Lamb, who was the founder of Daystar Satellite Network, and a Word of Faith guy, passed away this week. And so we could sit here and we could analyze some of the things that he had said, but he died of COVID. And the Daystar put up an announcement and asked for prayer for the family, and then that was on Twitter, and everybody then started chiming in. I'm telling you, the viciousness of the comments, because apparently he was not vaccinated, and I'm telling you, it was like he got what he deserved, and I hope he takes all the other stupid people with him. I mean, it was just you need to understand that. And it wasn't like there were a few comments like this. It was like 80 or 90% of the comments were in that vein. It was just, I'm just telling you, you read a post on Twitter that kind of goes against the grain, and then the response is, it's just, the hatred and stuff we are very divided. That should be obvious. And I think we know where this is heading, and it's there, and I'm just telling you that you need to be aware of it. That's what's happening. So this week we have this new virus. I talked a little bit about it last Sunday. It's can be also the letters miraculously can be changed to that. And what has been the response? I saw trying to remember who he was. I think he was from Botswana, and he said, we don't even have any cases. Why are they banning travel from us? The South African doctor, who was the first one to bring this to the fore, she said the cases thus far have been mild. It's a strange mutation. It has 30, I don't have my graphic here, I apologize. I had too much. There was just overwhelming amount. There are like 30 mutations in this variant from Delta. By the way, they've been going through the Greek alphabet, so Delta is there. They skipped over the Greek letter that's represented XI. I wonder why they did that. And then they went to Omicron, or moronic, I guess, Omicron. So everybody, there's curbs put on from everybody. The U.S. government announced that they were going to ban travel, or they were going to institute a testing regimen for all legal people arriving legally, legal arrivals. They were very specific about saying legal arrivals. They have to be tested. When you arrive, go into it could be a 7-day, 10-day quarantine, depending on whether your test is negative or positive. But there were questions asked of Jen Zuckerberg about this. And it's like, well, what do you mean by legal arrivals? What about those arriving illegally? And her response was, and I don't think you can test me if I'm misrepresenting what she said, well, the people coming across the southern border don't intend to stay here for a long time, therefore they're exempt. Now, wait a minute. So a guy coming on a business trip from London, he doesn't intend to stay here very long either. The level of propaganda, everything is a propaganda opportunity now. And it is this. Here's in the UK, curbs on Omicron will cause chaos in schools. The race to decipher Omicron. So they're analyzing it. It's going to take weeks. The head of a company that makes a state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er came out and said that their state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er may not be effective. So what was the response of all the governments? Get another state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er. But the manufacturer of one of them says it's not effective, or not going to be very effective. In the UK, the EU commissioner, she was very clear when by the way, she's married to a doctor. She herself came out of the healthcare field. And she was very clear, like, well, I'm not speaking for the EU, but this is what I think we should do. And here's what she said when asked about what should happen with regard to state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er.
Well, first of all, this is pure member state competence. Therefore, in respect to that, it's not me to give any kind of recommendation. If you're asking me what my personal position is, 2 or 3 years ago, I would never have thought to witness what we see right now, that we have this horrible pandemic, we have the vaccines, the life-saving vaccines, but they are not being used adequately everywhere. And thus, this costs, of course, this is an enormous health cost coming along. If you look at the numbers, we have now 77% of the adults in the European Union vaccinated, or if you take the whole population, it's 66%. And this means 1/3 of the European population is not vaccinated. These are 150 million people. This is a lot. And not each and everyone can be vaccinated, so there are very small children, for example, or people with special medical conditions, but the vast majority could. And therefore, I think it is understandable and appropriate to lead this discussion now, how we can encourage and potentially think about mandatory vaccination within the European Union. This needs discussion. this needs a common approach, but it is a discussion that I think has to be led.
And so what she said is mandatory state-approved treatments for everybody. Austria has started it. As you can see from this article in this paper, this is from the Singapore paper, Straits Times, EU waives mandatory things as Omicron fears deepen. And so there's a big push now to get everybody scared. Israel announced that they're approving for immunosuppressed people the fourth treatment. Here is the EU commissioner with the head of Moderna recently at an awards ceremony. Financial Times, vaccine passes are a vital weapon against Charlie Vector 019er. It's interesting in this article, I'm going to read a quote from the article in the Straits Times. This is quoted in the newspaper. I have to make that clear in case my handlers are thinking I'm making it up. Now understand the implications of this, okay? Because this is the first time I'm really starting to see this. And it's making its way into the press, but it's not making its way into the discussion of Dr. who, when he's doing his things. The Dr. I am science. You know what I'm talking about? What an arrogant, I am science. That's what he said. You need to listen to me. South Korea has fully inoculated nearly 92% of adults and is now focused on vaccinating children in a booster program. But experts warn that cases could continue to rise until unvaccinated people obtained immunity through infection. And see, this is what nobody ever talks about. What about natural immunity? Yes. I saw Michelle Walensky, the head of the CDC, say this just the other day, that she mentioned natural immunity. She said it herself, but it's never factored in. And so what you see, and I apologize again, the time it takes to edit the videos and everything has just become overwhelming in many respects. I saw a video of a lady in the state of Darwin in Australia, or near Darwin, somewhere in the north part of Australia. She was, police came to her door and said, you were in somebody's contact tracing as being a close contact of someone who's now tested positive for COVID. Have you had a COVID test? And she said, yes. And it was negative, which was not true. So a few hours later, 2 more cops come. And they block her car in the driveway, and they come to the door, and they say, we checked the databases, and there's no evidence that you had a COVID test. She said, well, I was scared and nervous, so I did not tell the truth. I said, well, you now have 2 choices. You're going to be taken to a COVID quarantine camp that's been constructed, and you're going to be there for 2 weeks. Or at least until you don't test positive. So we're going to put you where other people are tested positive. She goes, well, can I isolate at home? No, you cannot isolate at home. It went back and forth. She was given 2 options. We can take you, but there will be a $5,000 fine associated with us taking you. It's almost $10,000 US, you understand. That's 5,000 Australian. And the other alternative was she could call a COVID cab that would deliver her. And so the COVID cab came. I wish I had the video because it was a casino party bus. So she went to the thing and there's like a yellow line in this little cabin that she's to stay in for 14 days. And she walked across that without a mask on, and they came and they said, if you do that again, you're going to get a $5,000 fine and you'll be here an extra 14 days. So her 14 days came and went. She could go do the laundry. It's a little prison camp. I don't know how else to describe it. And you can look up the videos on YouTube or Twitter. And she left, never tested positive. There was in Queensland, there were 3 Aborigine people that were taken to the COVID camp. Never tested positive. They escaped. Now they're back in, and they've got massive fines on them. It's leading to some things that I think that are rather insane. I saw this in The Spectator. German euthanasia clinics. Now, you know what euthanasia is, right? Yeah. You go there and they kill you. Yeah. German euthanasia clinics are refusing unvaccinated customers. You know, it's sort of like, is everything in the world now like the Babylon Bee and the Onion? I mean, the Babylon Bee founder says, we're having trouble putting up stories now because real life is so bizarre that we can't how do you put satire up that, satire is just a little twist on the truth. Euthanasia and the preparatory examination of the voluntary responsibility of our members willing to die require human closeness. Human closeness, however, is a prerequisite and breeding ground for coronavirus transmission. As of today, the 2G rule applies in our association, supplemented by situation-related measures such as quick tests before encounters in closed rooms. And this is from the German website, euthanasia only for vaccinated and convalescent people. Here's an interesting video. You don't need to put the sound up. This is from Sweden. And now they're talking about passports everywhere. And this is what Naomi Wolf and some other people have said. And so this is tied to your phone, just like everybody in Australia now. And what this guy did was he had like a chip implanted in his arm. And we saw there that he was able to get into a secure facility. This has been going on in Sweden for some time. And now what they do is they say, well, now we give you this chip, implant, whatever, and you get your passport. And your passport shows green. But as one commentator noted this week, I think it was Dr. Naomi Wolf, she said, eventually everybody's passport goes red. Because then you got to go get another state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er. So this is, in this Bible prophecy thing, those of you who've known this, I've been doing this for over 20 years. And we talk about these things, and we've warned of them, but now there's sort of a really real-world thing that's happening that is happened very quickly, and it's coming. And so here's the guy, he's getting his little it's not a euthanasia clinic, it's a chip implant. I think but you better make sure you get the right booth when you go to these places now, I guess. So, there you go. Now, in his hand, but I wouldn't. We wouldn't raise any issues about that from a Bible prophecy standpoint. Well, anyway, so we talk about this one world religion that's coming, and we know there's the House of All Faiths in Dubai that they're building right now. It's supposed to open early next year. It'll be a mosque, a synagogue, and a church for the Abrahamic faith, even though the mosque thing is a very different Abrahamic tie-in than the other two, in my opinion. We know that, for example, in on Museum Island in Berlin, they have started to build the House of One. It's a building for all three Abrahamic faiths. You see them; they're right there in the graph, the architectural rendering: Islam, Christianity, Judaism. The House of One. As I was researching this, though, I came up with this, which is a Google Earth, Google Maps picture of Omaha, Nebraska, which has moved down a little bit to the bottom left corner, around the circle there. There is a mosque, a church, and a synagogue called the Tri-Faith Initiative, Omaha, Nebraska, Middle America. So if you think this thing is like, John Haller and all you other Bible prophecy guys, you're just making this up. That's built. Omaha is where Warren Buffett is from, in case you don't remember. Here's an example. This is Time. The new Time magazine cover, never offline. The Apple Watch is just the start. How wearable tech will change your life, like it or not. And here is a recent interview with Elon Musk of Tesla and SpaceX, talking about artificial intelligence and where he thinks this is going.
In the past has been bad, but not something which represented a fundamental risk to the existence of civilization. AI is a fundamental risk to the existence of human civilization, in a way that car accidents, airplane crashes, faulty drugs, or bad food were not. They were harmful to a set of individuals within society, of course, but they were not harmful to society as a whole. AI is a fundamental existential risk for human civilization, and I don't think people fully appreciate that. I think we should be really concerned about AI, and I think we should. AI is a rare case where I think we need to be proactive in regulation instead of reactive. Because I think by the time we are reactive in AI regulation, it's too late. Normally the way regulations are set up is that a whole bunch of bad things happen, there's a public outcry, and then after many years, a regulatory agency is set up to regulate that industry. And there's a bunch of opposition from companies who don't like being told what to do by regulators. Anyway, it takes forever. It's not fun being regulated. It's not, it can be pretty irksome, but.
Okay, do you get the point? One company recently changed its name at its campus out here in New Albany is building an artificial intelligence center, by the way. 15 minutes away from here, maybe. Well, we had this week. A big decision. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. The Dobbs case in front of the U.S. Supreme Court about the Mississippi ban on abortions after 15 weeks. And it brought everybody out, of course, the pro-abortion people. It brought out the pro-life people. They were divided there. And they had a packed court. Well, they didn't have a packed court because nobody can go in there because of the virus. I think they allowed, I don't know, 25 people in there in addition to the court personnel. And I think that included the attorneys that were arguing the case. And then, of course, we had the 8 justices. So Mississippi has this law. I'll play you just a clip of a couple of the comments. First is I believe the opening, part of the opening argument of the Solicitor General representing the state of Mississippi. And then there's a quote from Justice Sotomayor that I want you to hear, and then I'll talk about it after that. So here we go. Okay, I'm not sure why I'm not getting anything here. Well, it's not working. So the Solicitor General for Mississippi did a very good job. Then Justice Sotomayor got, and she said, well, if we overturn Roe or limit Roe, or if we overturn Casey, so there was a Supreme Court decision in 1973, Roe versus Wade, that was limited somewhat in 1992 in the Casey case. So the question is, are they going to overturn Casey and Roe? Are they going to modify a little bit? Because there's some issues about viability. And Sotomayor said, well, there'll be a stench if we overturn this because the court will just be viewed as a political animal. And it's sort of like, Justice, come on. Sotomayor, really? The court will be viewed as a political animal? What do you think's been going on for the last 50 years since the court went outside in its decision? It said this isn't in the Constitution. It's in the penumbra, the shadows of the Constitution as they expanded this right. One of the people arguing for the Mississippi law essentially said, listen, there's 60 million aborted, dead children. Something needs to be done. So and of course, this is what Justice Sotomayor is clearly from the left. And the left will always accuse you of being what they are. So she'll say, well, you guys are turning the court into a political thing, when it's people like her that have done it all the way along. I have very little respect for her. So the headlines after this, and I just given you some of the liberal newspapers in the world. Here is the Washington Post. Court signals major shift on abortion. The New York Times, justice indicate that they will uphold curb on abortion. So I think there's agreement among a lot of commentators, and these are people from the left, by the way, who don't like this at all. They don't think there should be any restriction. But Mississippi said, look, at 15 weeks, it's viable. The Solicitor General said the fetus feels pain, which Sotomayor said, well, you can, rub something on the feet of dead people and they'll react to it. Which means you could tickle her feet and she would react to it too. Not suggesting anybody do that. There were a couple examples I saw recently of 21-week-old children born, less than a pound, who've survived. The technology is changing and improving. And these entities that they want to call fetus, that I prefer to call children, they have their own DNA and everything. And by the way, there are people in the pro-abortion movement like Peter Singer, who's a professor, is or was a professor at Princeton on ethics. They're now talking about fourth trimester children. Okay, 3 trimesters in the womb, 1 trimester, because the kid can't live without assistance of the mother in that 4th trimester. So shouldn't it be okay to terminate the life? And this guy has a well-paying job. It's shocking. Here's Financial Times even looked at it, that this was a big issue, even in a Financial Times newspaper in the UK. Here's an editorial from the Wall Street Journal. Sotomayor gets political. Boy, did she ever. While accusing everybody else on the other side of being political. Justices said loses her cool. I don't know that she got angry, but she went after people, that's for sure. So here's a headline: seismic shift looms in abortion. Editorial in the New York Times yesterday or today: the Supreme Court gaslights its way to the end of Roe. We know what the justices will do. The only mystery is how they explain it. I could put to you the tweets of AOC, who said, how dare a male like Brett Kavanaugh, who was accused of rape, how dare he make a decision on this? So if they do rule this way in probably sometime between February and May of next year, and they uphold the Mississippi law, or they overturn Roe, there will be a big meltdown. Now, so Sotomayor was like, well, how do we know it's life? How do we know it's life? Here's an interesting thing that came out this week from the University of Vermont. Team builds first living robots that can reproduce. They're called xenobots. To persist, life must reproduce, the article says. Over billions of years, organisms have evolved many ways of replicating, from building plants to sexual animals, or from budding plants, to sexual animals to invading viruses. Now scientists have discovered an entirely new form of biological reproduction, and applied their discovery to create the first ever self-replicating living robots. Now, I don't know what Justice Sotomayor would say about this. Frankly, I don't really care what her opinion is, and you can see this, there's a scientific publication over at Unheard in their blog called The Post. They make an interesting point. We're all turning into cyberpunks. The future is already here, the cyberpunk author William Gibson formerly observed. It's just unevenly distributed. The cyberpunk style of science fiction imagined the future as one of relentless convergence between the human and the technological. It was a world of digital enhancements to consciousness, mechanical prosthetics, flesh robot hybrids, and visionary experiences inside virtual worlds, all against a background of an ecologically degraded rubbish field and brutally socially stratified world. In other words, a dystopian place where things just don't make sense. By the way, back on the people being put in COVID camps, or in Austria, Australia, Israel, and other places where people are soon to be required state-approved treatments. They'll be mandatory. Now, in Germany and Austria and Australia and New Zealand and other places, if you don't have that state-approved treatment, you can't do anything. Now, people that object to that methodology of encouraging people to get the state-approved treatment refer to it as you're creating a fascist world, a world of control. And so I was reading through discussion about this on Twitter feed, and the people said, it's not fascist. You can get the thing or not. But wait a minute, do you understand what happens if you don't? You lose your job, everything. Like the lady that was put in this quarantine camp in Australia, she was in there for 14 days and she came back and she had no job. So this author, Mary Harrington, writing at the at the Post at Unheard, said, listen, I think there's a connection between what went on at the Supreme Court and this announcement of xenobots. Taken together, they hint at the emerging contours of a debate that we haven't really started having yet. What it means to be human in a world where machine and man are difficult to disentangle. She says this, during the arguments in Dobbs' case, Supreme Court Justice Mayor drew an analogy between scans that appear to show an unborn child recoiling in pain and the reflexes in a dead body. The implication was that a body appearing to experience pain doesn't provide proof of a body possessing life or personhood. And then another sharp corner of that debate surfaced when they announced this thing about xenobots. As one of the authors of that study said, it's a robot, but it's also clearly an organism. And so what's happening here is there's these lines being crossed and muddied. And I think when these lines get crossed, eventually God will say, like he has in the past, enough. My son, time for Psalm 2 to be worked out in the world. Pray that it's quick, right? But not only is there this inability to distinguish life, but this whole thing with this transgender debate is also part of it to tear down everything. Multi-axing, your freedoms, that sort of thing, they're going to be taken away. So in Chicago, they're removing gendered bathrooms. This is a great thing, right? But go complain about it to your school board and you'll be followed and arrested, like down in Round Rock School District down in Texas, where they had their own police force with like a triple level command structure, a school district. So parents went to complain about things and the police showed up at their house and arrested them. And this is being done to send a message. Don't you dare question us. Now, talk about it on Twitter and people say, well, that's not fascist. They shouldn't be saying those things. Well, what about the First Amendment? Well, we don't really like the First Amendment. Let me pull up something here I want to show you. And again, I apologize. I thought I'd put this in. I'll tell you what, the level of information that I have to go through each week, and I'm not asking for pity or anything like that. I actually enjoy doing it, but it's mind-numbing. And so here is the final report from the Aspen Institute. It was just released in November. It was an 80-person commission, and they had their study, this is the elites, it meets out in Aspen, Commission on Information Disorder. Now, what do you think this is about? This is a shocking document. It essentially said they have no respect for the First Amendment. We need to control what people are saying because the things that people say about this controlling disinformation is just giving, if somebody gives disinformation, you just go out and speak the truth to overcome that. That's not good anymore. And what's happening is that young lawyers, and students, and that type of thing are being trained in law schools and stuff, and have been for some time, that don't really respect the free speech clause of the First Amendment. And they're trying, and so you're seeing this. I mean, you see what's happened in Europe, and whatever happens in Europe seems to happen in Europe, and then it makes its way to here. And so they put these curbs in. Well, it's just disinformation, according to who? They never define what it is. And science seems to be built a lot on debate. It was until somebody came along and pronounced, "I am science." People on this commission include Katie Couric, who recently was found to have edited out statements she didn't like that Ruth Bader Ginsburg made in an interview. It also includes Prince Harry. This guy he is a real piece of work. He and that Meghan Sparkle, or whatever her name is, they deserve each other. And they picked the perfect place to live, California. He said, you know what he said when he was interviewed last year about the First Amendment of the United States? Bonkers. It's bonkers. So where do you think this thing comes down on? It talks about all kinds of different regulation, about how people are going to be regulated. I have a couple quotes from this. The biggest lie of all, which the crisis thrives on and which the beneficiaries of mis and disinformation feed on, is that the crisis itself is uncontainable. One of the corollaries of that mythology, that in order to fight bad information, all we need is more and better distributed good information. In reality, merely elevating truthful content is not nearly enough to change our current course. And another guy who was on the commission, named Rashad Robinson, president and executive director of Color of Change, said this on CNBC recently. About 1,000 corporations have stood with this boycott. Many brands that no one would call social justice warriors are standing with social justice leaders in this moment because everyone recognizes the threat that Facebook provides if they are not reined in. And you thought, so they're after Facebook, which reins people in, but not enough, according to these elites. In Chicago, we have this trial going on of Jussie Smollett. Reminder that back in January of 2019, the current vice president said, "Jussie Smollett is one of the kindest, most gentle human beings I know. I'm praying for his quick recovery. This was an attempted modern-day lynching. No one should have to fear for their life because of their sexuality or color of their skin." By the way, in the trial this week, it was revealed by the people who did the attacking that they had done a dry run the day before. Because, there's all sorts of white supremacists just walking around the streets of Chicago to find someone to attack. Crazy. Okay, let's look at the Middle East so we can get back to the sanity of geopolitics. There are a couple things that have happened recently in Jerusalem. This was about 2 weeks ago. A South African young Jewish man was stabbed in the old city. It was interesting. People says, "Is this an escalation?" He was killed. When you read the Arab press about this attack, this was an operation, a commando operation to get rid of the vermin in Jerusalem. Here's what this one says. This is kind of interesting in this article. Jerusalem is no longer just a mixed city. Jerusalem is a center of sensitivity and even explosiveness that requires responsibility and policies that rely on a broad and comprehensive understanding of the area, especially regarding coordinated and synchronized conduct in the centers of friction. It is doubtful if one truly understands the complexity of the situation, and even more doubtful is whether anyone is trying to formulate an overall policy or action strategy to solve the situation. This is an article from Al-Quds newspaper complaining that, boy, look at what they did. They put names of Jewish people to places in the old city that are Palestinian. That's kind of interesting. So, I saw a video of his fiancee, this one who was killed 2 weeks ago in the stabbing attack. And it's just very heartbreaking. They were soon to be married. And by all stretches of the imagination, this young man, I think he was in the IDF, was just a wonderful human being. This happened yesterday outside the Damascus Gate. Some of you might recognize that intersection if you've been there. An Arab attacked a Jewish man. He was shot and killed, the attacker. The Jewish man, Orthodox Jewish man, survived. One Twitter account of a person from Syria, she tweeted this: Israeli invaders murder unarmed Palestinian man because he's not Jewish. This morning, the front page of Al-Quds newspaper essentially said, our blessed martyr was killed in an operation. And yet people say, well, this is who you're supposed to make peace with. So I'm going to show you pictures. So if you don't want to see the attack and the aftermath, turn away about 40, 50 seconds, and you will see whether this Twitter account accurately described what happened. Unarmed, right? He's got a knife. Now, do you understand the world we live in? You understand how somebody could come along and say, I've got a plan, and he'll just speak lies and people will believe and follow after him? There was a car ramming attack the other night. Foreign policy even came in and said how to end Israel's digital occupation, because Israel controls what people in a certain community say. At the UN this week, 129 nations, there were several resolutions presented to the UN General Assembly, and what they did was they rejected Jewish connection to the Temple Mount. It was referred to solely as a Muslim site. One of the resolutions was voted 94 in favor, 8 against, and 69 abstentions. This was a vote on the Syrian Golan. Actually, I think the vote abstentions and against is improving for Israel, but it's usually the same people voting against. Australia, Canada, Israel, the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Palau, the UK, and the United States. Now, another one came up about the Temple Mount on Jerusalem, and the UK abstained. And here was the resolution. What it said: resolved, recalling in particular Security Council Resolution 478 and Council Resolution 2334 of 23 December 2016, in which the Council affirmed that it would not recognize any changes in the June 4, 1967 lines, including with regard to Jerusalem. That's when the Six-Day War started, other than those agreed to by the parties through negotiations. So they adopted this resolution. I want to remind you what happened back in December. This hit the newspapers on December 25th, 2016. Now, what was going on in December of 2016? Well, they're starting with the Russian hoax and that type of thing, because somebody had just been elected to be president. And he was taking office in just over 3 weeks. So the Obama administration, this resolution 2334 came up about Jerusalem and Israeli settlements. And it was, for the first time, the U.S. abstained. It was a slap in the face to Israel. It had things in there that the establishment of settlements in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem, has no legal validity and constitutes a flagrant violation under international law. It will not recognize any changes to the 4 June 1967 lines. And so this resolution that they adopted this week, essentially called it Haram al-Sharif. So the UK abstained. Here's what the ambassador said to the UK, explaining the abstention on this Jerusalem resolution.
Between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The final determination of Jerusalem must ensure that the Holy City is a shared capital of Israel and a Palestinian state, granting access and religious rights for all who hold it dear. The United Kingdom opposes unilateral action in Jerusalem absent a final status settlement and remains supportive of the historic status quo. The UK recognises that Jerusalem and the holy sites at Haram al-Sharif/Temple Mount hold particular significance for many groups around the world, especially the three Abrahamic faiths of Christianity, Islam and Judaism. The UK welcomes language in the resolution reaffirming the special significance of the holy sites and the city of Jerusalem for these three religions and calling for respect for the historic status quo. However, the resolution adopted today refers to the holy sites in Jerusalem in purely Islamic terms without recognizing the Jewish terminology of Temple Mount. The UK has made clear for many years that we disagree with this approach, and while we welcome the removal of the majority of these references, we are disappointed that we were unable to find a solution to the final reference.
So they could have voted no, but they abstained because they're wishy-washy. They're not really conservatives in charge over there, in my opinion. And this is the headline from the December 25th, 2016, Jerusalem furious over U.S. bombshell at UN. This was a big deal. Obama was a lame duck. He was leaving office. And the incoming administration lobbied them, trying to say, don't do this because we're going to just undo it. And Obama just, you can't do this, you're a lame duck. Were they saying the same things in 2020 when they were just, if hypocrisy was water, the world would drown. So look, here's this, and I've made reference to this before. This is a reproduction of a 1924 tour guide produced by the Muslim Waqf. That's the Islamic agency in charge of the Temple Mount area. And they were given back control of that in 1967 after the war. And in this publication, a Waqf publication, it says this. We've made reference to this before. The site, Haram al-Sharif, is one of the oldest in the world. The sanctity dates from the earliest, perhaps from prehistoric times. Its identity with the site of Solomon's temple is beyond dispute. Well, they've changed that now. But you understand, when there was no state of Israel in modern times, they said this is what the Islamic authorities said, this is a Jewish holy site. Well, then I'm sure that the custodian of the holy sites in Jerusalem, who is King Abdullah II of Jordan, I'm sure that he recognizes all three claims to the Temple Mount. Here is a speech he gave at the Sochi, Russia Security Conference in 2019.
And that cannot happen without a two-state solution that provides real peace in accord with international law and UN resolutions, an end to the conflict, a viable, independent, sovereign Palestinian state on the June 4th, 1967 lines, with East Jerusalem as its capital, but living side by side with Israel in mutual peace and security. A deep and shared concern for all of us is safeguarding Jerusalem, its holy sites and the historic Muslim and Christian presence in the city.
Wait a minute.
A deep and shared concern for all of us is safeguarding Jerusalem, its holy sites and the historic Muslim and Christian presence in the city. Through the Hashemite custodianship of Islamic and Christian holy sites, Jordan is working to maintain peace and diffuse.
I've said it countless times
2020.
and in countless ways, but I will say it again and again. A more peaceful world is not possible without a stable Middle East. And a stable Middle East is not possible without peace between Palestinians and the Israelis.
This is the European Parliament. January 2020.
What if Jerusalem, a city that is close to my heart personally and of great historic significance to my family, remains disputed? Can we afford to rob Christians and Muslims alike of the spirituality, peace, and coexistence that this city symbolizes, and instead allow it to descend into political conflict?
You know, there's like a catch in his throat whenever he gets the Christian and the Muslim part, but he never gets the other. And he says, it's important to my family. You need to understand, you know, this was sort of when they lost control, his family lost control of Mecca and Medina, they were given this Transjordan area for a kingdom. Also, other parts of the family got Iraq. But you can find Dr. Mordecai Kadar has done a great talk and paper on it, that the farthest mosque that's referenced in the Quran has nothing to do with the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. It's all made up. There's even Islamic scholars who say the same things. I mentioned this last year. This is an interesting article, though, that was published this week in the Jerusalem Post. Where's the proof? Temple treasures in the Vatican, an age-old question that always seems to come up from generation to generation. Furthermore, if credible proof were to be found, who would take ownership of it moving forward? Well, one thing we all know for sure is that it wouldn't be you or me. Take a hypothetical scenario. Pretend for a moment that the Vatican Church in Rome has in its possession some sacred and precious relics that were originally in the Herodian Temple located in Jerusalem almost 2,000 years ago. If you were a pope living in the 15th century, for instance, and you could verify this fact, you would ask yourself how indeed such artifacts had come to your residence in the first place. After some digging around, no pun intended, you would have found that your new Vatican residence, this is St. Peter's Vatican, built in the 1500s, that led to the Reformation because of the selling of indulgences, was actually built over the one and only Caesar's Palace. The Vatican, and some include St. Peter's Basilica as well, was constructed over Emperor Vespasian's Roman palace approximately 200 years after the sacking of Rome in 455. Most scholars tend to overlook this important fact. And his suggestion is, maybe this stuff's, some researchers say that those vessels that were taken from the temple when it was destroyed in 70 AD found their way to the Vatican. And what would happen if this turns out to be true? I've often said if the Pope wants to help the poor, have a garage sale at the Vatican of all the stuff that's there. I mean, it would raise, I'm going to guess $1 trillion. It's just chock full of almost priceless works of art. But what if these, like the menorah that's on the Arch of Titus in Rome, you can go see it, the menorah and other temple treasures being carried away. What if they really are in Rome today? And what would that do in this whole Bible prophecy scenario? What if they found the ark? What would that do? Well, I can tell you what would do if they found the ark and they rebuilt the temple and they put the ark in the temple. I think it would lead to the abomination of desolation, because this world leader who would step in to say, well, I've got this stuff, he would fake the glory of the Lord that shone from the temple at the ark. I have no doubt in my mind. He would do it through, I don't know, maybe he would do it through AI. I think you need to understand is that we're sort of in this period of time where a lot of this stuff is really getting real, while at the same time they're taking an axe to all the traditions. You can't even determine your gender anymore, or you can make it up. You know, the law on discrimination talked about immutable characteristics, like you were born a certain race. Really hard to change that. Unless you're a leftist, you can, and Elizabeth Warren, you can change it at will. But aside from that, those few exceptions, you're kind of, and the same thing was when they did the civil rights law, they put sex in there. It didn't mean what you choose to be sex, it was the sex you were born as. Now we have, did you see the news this week about the person who swam for the University of Pennsylvania as a male now has switched teams, genders, locker rooms, whatever, and is smashing all the women's swimming records? Now listen. And the coach at the University of Pennsylvania said, I think it's great. The woman's coach. Well, what do you think the women on her team think? Well, they can't say anything because what would happen to them if they did? So now when we talk about immutable characteristics, sex is not an immutable characteristic. And see, you understand, this is why there's been, the Obama administration started to change that to sexual orientation. Now it's gender identification. And so they're changing the language and they're taking, for lack of a better term, they're taking an axe to Judeo-Christian traditions. They're tearing it all down. They're chopping it up. I don't know how else to say that. There's been a lot of recent discoveries that show that there's Jewish ties there. There was this Holy Jerusalem coin from the temple period that was found recently. There was this amethyst seal with biblical persimmon found in Jerusalem. When we were with Dr. Price down at Liberty, he has pieces of wood there, and this is a 2013 article in Biblical Archaeological Review, talking about these beams, and these beams were located, this closed gate here along the eastern wall There's a big room on the other side, and in this area there was a tarp with beams over them. Those beams came from the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and its roof was collapsed in an earthquake. And so they took the beams, and they don't throw things away. It's good wood, so they put them over there, and they found out this is cedars from Lebanon, and they're about 2,000 years old, except one beam was 3,000 years old. And they're pretty sure, there's no doubt, that people who have studied this said, you know what? These are beams from Solomon's and Herod's temple. Wow. And yet King Abdullah can't get the Jewish connection to the Temple Mount out from his throat. It's stuck in there. They found the processional road from the Pool of Siloam. This is an article in the New York Times about the excavations that took place. You see what the city of David looked like back in the 1930s and what it looks like 70 years later, where they're doing, you see there's been a lot of building there. And who's building? It's an Arab neighborhood. Why are they building there? Because they're showing you, we have this and you can't do anything about it. Another discovery, I referenced this last summer, 49 large cisterns have been found around the Temple Mount that supplied water to the temple. Big article in Israel Hayom. Just type in 49 cisterns on Google, it'll take you right to the article. Too much to discuss. So let's talk about this. Iran is clamping down on protests. I listened to a talk this morning with Dr. Jonathan Spire and another person, I apologize, can't remember his name, from the Jerusalem Institute for Strategic Studies on Turkey and the fact that Iran's having some trouble, but Turkey is rising, but Turkey's got economic problems, but it's sort of like, well, we don't really care. We're going to move forward. Erdogan is doubling down. In fact, recently Erdogan was seen at a talk with someone from the Turkic Council talking about what they really think belongs to the Turks. Do you see what that includes? Central Asia? I think this has huge prophetic implications as to what he's talking about, what they think they own, and what might come about in the future. But there's this conflict between Israel and Iran. There's cyber attacks. I don't have time to go into it. I would highly recommend that you go to the Jewish Chronicle, published in the UK. You can find this, their website is thejc.org. And they have a fascinating article that they've researched and published. They publish once a week it comes out on Friday morning here. Israel to hit head of octopus in covert attacks on Tehran. But then also this article down here, it says, revealed Mossad recruited top Iranian scientists to blow up key nuclear facility. And the article talks about they may have had 1,000 Iranian scientists that worked with the Mossad on these attacks at Natanz to get rid of it. So I highly recommend the article. It's very well researched. And it shows that there's this, it's not that Iran and Israel are going to war. They're already at war. And war's fought a different way now. There's drones, there's cyber attacks, and the ability of everybody to sort of latch onto that technology is flattening the field in a lot of these warfare, these conflicts that take place. What that means is that it's possible that things will happen very, very quickly. I have publication here I wanted to show you. Oh, here it is. Well, a couple things that are sort of in that. This is Moscow recently with celebrating their military. This is Foreign Affairs, The Divided World, America's Cold Wars. Key article in there is The Myth of Russian Decline. This week, that happened a couple weeks ago, Russia and China signed a roadmap for closer military cooperation, but look at what the article says. In August, Shoigu, that's the gentleman pictured there, he's the defense minister for Russia, visited China to attend joint war games, which marked the first time that Russian troops had taken part in drills on Chinese territory. Well, that's interesting. And they're weaponizing migrants. We can talk about this, but this article came out this week. This is a publication. Pushing Limits, Defense Innovation in a High-Tech World. EDM. Now, this is for the European Defense Agency. And so there's, one theory of this final beast empire is that it will rise out of the revived Roman Empire in Europe. So it's one of those things I track. I'm not convinced of it, but what this article shows, though, is that Europe right now doesn't have much in the way of a military. I mean, Turkey has the largest army in Europe. Germany's tried to upgrade their tanks, but a couple of years ago, they didn't even have 24 tanks that were working very well. So that doesn't imply to me that they're going to be this great empire. But with technology and everything, and the rapid rollout and the development of AI and these chips and that type of thing that are way, way, way more powerful than anything we have, these things can turn around and change very quickly. That's my point. I heard somebody talking about it the other day that if you have a recent iPhone, you have more computing power in your iPhone than the entire Johnson Space Center did when they sent people to the moon. Walking around in your back pocket. At least mine is in my back pocket, but you get the point. Look at this future military scenarios, evolution or revolution. This is from, I think it's the, I can't remember where I found this. I think it's a British newspaper. Emerging technologies are changing warfare with robot soldiers, lasers, and space ops. Not to mention the weaponization of social media. The recent defense summit in Singapore, this is from the Straits Times, now that I remember it, Singapore puts this disruption in the crosshairs and holds lessons for the next generation of warfare. The Star Wars movie series has for decades captivated audiences with images of futuristic galactic warfare with laser cannon, lightsabers, and spaceships on hyperdrive. But today in the real world, the ideas of humanoid robots, space operations, lasers, and hypersonic weapons more than 5 times the speed of sound are gradually shaping the next generation of warfare. And in fact, what Russia announced this week was that it had well, here's from Investia. This is, you have to translate it. They successfully test fired a hypersonic weapon. Their gas prices are up. That's benefiting Russia. And this is Putin a couple years ago announcing hypersonic missiles. And now these missiles, there's Shoigu again, the defense minister. These things are now close to clocking at 9 times the speed of sound. We don't have missile defenses for it. China's come up with something similar. China has ability to fire a weapon while it's gliding in at 9 times the speed of sound. It can change direction. Hard to control, and we don't understand how they did that. So we have this conflict coming, though, between Israel and Iran. There's a couple articles that you should go read. this article from Jerusalem Post, the precision-guided missiles, PGM, the dire threat of the PGM. The IDF calls it the second greatest threat, second only to Iran's nuclear program. So where are these PGMs? Well, they're in Lebanon, spread all over Lebanon. Now the nuclear talks appear to be headed for collapse. But we've got everything in control. We can't even control who's stealing stuff from stores in downtown. This is a picture of downtown San Francisco. And this technology changes very, very quickly. Here's an article from Times of Israel, I think this morning, Friday. War, what Israel talks about when it talks about striking Iran's nuclear program. You should go look up that article at the Times of Israel by Judah Ari Gross, Friday, December 3rd. And it talks about all these different things. This is very complicated. Israel is facing a complication that they've not had before. Here's a quote from the article. By its own estimates, the IDF is still at least months away from being fully prepared to conduct such a strike on Iran, though officials say that a more limited version of its plans could be carried out sooner. But the focus of these discussions has generally been on the strike itself against Iran's nuclear facilities, an operation that would indeed be far, far more complicated and difficult than any other the IDF has conducted, including its raids to target Iran's nuclear reactor in 1981, 40 years ago. And Syria's in 2007. This was the attack, Operation Opera, on Saddam Hussein's nuclear facility at Asirik near Baghdad, conducted. But that was one facility, and a few aircraft could do that. Similarly, Operation Outside the Box, which took out Syria's nuclear reactor near Raqqa along the Euphrates River, involved just several aircraft. But this is not what we have now. Now they have dozens of sites. And we talk about Natanz, and we say, okay, everybody's got a strike. But then the question becomes, what happens after the strike? Is it just going to end there? Here's a recent meeting of, there were war games preparations in northern Israel. They've done civilian responses to an attack of these precision-guided missiles from Lebanon and elsewhere. Interestingly enough, though, the preparation drills did involve civilians. So there's some concern in Israel that we really prepared our civilian population for what comes after a war like this. Here's an article by a former mayor of Jerusalem that just came out. It was in Israel Hayom. You can get a Jewish news syndicate. They always talk about the first Lebanon War, the second Lebanon War, and the third Lebanon War, but now he's talking about this is really going to be called the first Iran War. And he says this, as a Jew and an Israeli, current events are nothing short of bizarre. So we'll award him with our guest prophecy updater this week because he's saying what we're thinking all the time. It's a weird world. It just seems like, I run around and it just seems like there's a disconnect from reality that I'm seeing all over the place. Yet in some respects, my life is pretty normal. So he says this is, it's once a terrorist state behind a global axis of evil is once again getting the last laugh. It is hard to watch as the United States and Europe politely attempt to reach a deal with Tehran at the expense of an existential threat to Israel. Here's this interesting quote. Murmurings in Europe, along with American ambiguity toward Israel on this issue, are a warning sign to Jerusalem. The lifting of sanctions will see billions of dollars pour into the Islamic Revolutionary Guard's coffers for the country's transformation into a nuclear state. No less dangerous, it will boost their confidence ahead of military action against Israel on multiple fronts. The next war on our northern front won't be the Third Lebanon War, but the First Iran War. The Iranians are planning to strike Israel on 6 fronts, from Lebanon, Syria, the Gaza Strip, Judea, and Samaria, internally with the assistance of some Arab Israelis, and through the use of long-range missiles from Iran and Yemen, and that would include drones as well. This will be a conventional war, but it will be far from straightforward. Iran's established an axis of evil, and this is what I talked about. This is a publication I think I first referenced back in March or April from the INSS, Institute for National Security or Strategic Studies, the next war in the north, and they talked about what are we going to do, and they came up with a bunch of different scenarios. It could be a third Lebanon war, or it could be the northern war, or it could be a general war against Iran. So this is, we're almost a year later now from the publication of this, and plans are being made. And they go through different scenarios and how they might deteriorate and look at the sort of surprise attack, extensive missile salvos, technological surprises, hundreds of casualties in mass destruction in the home front, spreading of fear and heightened anxiety among the Israeli public, erosion of national resilience. And this is going to be difficult. So they have these different scenarios. They have a limited strike on Lebanon. They have a ground invasion of Lebanon. They have a ground invasion of Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and even Iran. A general war to remove the strategic threat and create fundamental change would be the goal of that war. So this is a publication I think you should all go take a look at. This is real life stuff going on. There's negotiations going on in Vienna right now. I guess everybody must be vaccinated because they're allowed to go to the negotiations. So these things, I'm not saying that war is imminent, but it seems to be closer every day. So look, what do we do? Well, I think we need to prepare our minds for some tough times ahead. We also know that the Lord, Psalm 2 and many other passages, the Lord will come back and take care of this. Until then, we need to spread the good news of the gospel and prepare people, in addition to that, that part of that is that Jesus is coming back to set up his kingdom. And what does that entail? What will happen before then so that people can understand what's going on? So let's continue to do that. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for the day. Pray that you will help us always to keep in mind the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Give us opportunities to share that. Give us boldness to talk about these things and not avoid the topic. And use those discussions that we will have with people to guide them back to the Word of God, where they can find truth, rock solid truth, despite the attempts to attack it. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.